Thank you very much. That's a phenomenal welcome. So I'm an inventor. I make gear. And one of the unusual things about that is, I'm sure we've all been to parties and we've heard people say, I'm an inventor. But the thing that I did that was different is I got my stuff on sale. It took years of blood, sweat and tears. We borrowed about every penny the bank would lend us. And it means that I can stand here today and I've actually got some gear that you can get here at B&H. Very cool photography gear that was born out of my need and desire to have it when it didn't exist. So what I'm going to do is, my gear does a few different things. I've got some lighting gear, and then I've got some other gear that's all about long exposures and time-lapse. So what I'm going to do today is, rather than throw everything in together, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself and my background. And then we're going to go on a little journey into lighting, and it's that first part which is kick the natural light habit. And so we're going to go for about 35-40 minutes, and then I'll open the floor to questions. And then after that we're going to roll straight on into the next part, which is going to be all about long exposures and time-lapse. So I hope there's going to be something for everyone to learn today. It's all basically come from my experience of being a pro photographer for years. So Enlight Photo is the company that I founded in 2006 to bring everything to make it available. And it was only recently that I got to the stage of inventing a few things over the years, and then I went, wait, stop. What is it that we do? And so it's only recently that we came up with this tagline, which is, what we do is essential gear for your photo life. So it's essential, it's cool, you've got to have it. It'll change the way you take photos. And it's your photo life is the way that you've all noticed, right? We all have smartphones now. There are cameras in those phones. I don't know about you, I've got a ton of cameras, but increasingly I'm leaving those cameras at home and I'm shooting with my smartphone. So it's more about a photo life than a life that's obsessed with photography, although I'm definitely that. So onwards and upwards, and I'm hoping my click is going to work. There we go. So we're going to kick off with kick the natural light habit with your Speedlight. So before I get into this, I'm just going to show you some photos just so you know that I'm not making it up. I was a pro photographer for several years. I shot for newspapers and magazines and corporate clients down in New Zealand, where I've been living for most of the last 15 years. And so here was a photo that I took. I was the desk junior. I was the guy that didn't really get to do the good assignments. And there was a huge fire had erupted at an industrial plant about 2 hours south of the capital city. And I was raring to go, and I was told to sit tight and wait for the scanner to let us know that somebody had, had a minor car accident or something like that. And all of the senior photographers went down to this. But what I had on my side was the fact that I'm a little bit of a technology geek, and I know how laptops work and things. And of course, nowadays, as you know, you can't be a photo geek. You can't be interested in photography without knowing all about the Lightrooms and the Photoshops and the Wi-Fis and all of that. So the senior photographers had gone down there, taken all these amazing photos, and then realized that they had no idea how to wire those photos back. So they sent me down to do all the IT troubleshooting. So I did that, and I got their photos uploading. And I wandered into the field next to the fire, and you could feel the heat on it. And I just looked across at it, and I thought that would just look incredible on about a 20-second exposure. So I set my tripod up, and that was the photo that ran full page spread the next day, which put the noses out of joint of the senior photographers, but I was quite pleased. That was the week before I got married. That was World Rally Championship, World Rally New Zealand. That was at the time the world champion Petter Solberg came tearing around this corner, and I had my big Mark II EOS 1D Mark IIN to my face. And a huge rock kicked up from his inside tire and smashed my face. So I was kind of turned around to the guy next to me. I said, "Am I okay?" And he was like, "No, you're bleeding from the." It was all. And luckily, by the time I got married, a week later, I was okay. But I still haven't caught up with him to tell him what nearly happened. And when I'm not shooting cars, I shoot people flying through the air. That was a couple of Speedlights at a mountain bike contest. And probably from my career, the one photo that I really love, that I remember. But anyway, and interestingly enough, of course, here there's some natural light in there, but I couldn't have taken that photo if I didn't know quite a bit about lighting. And I've been enjoying photography since I was a little kid. And right up until about a year into my professional photography career, I was a natural light photographer. I only shot with natural light. When people ask, what kind of flash gear, lighting gear? No, I'm a natural light photographer. And actually, for me, what that meant was, I don't know anything about lighting. Because it was really scary, right? You know, this was, I started my photography career in 2004, 2005. Film was still very much basically what everyone was shooting on. It was so difficult to master lighting back then. So I didn't, and was a natural light photographer. And that only went so far when I actually had a professional photography job, and my boss, the photo editor, said, just run downstairs to the photo studio and take these pack shots. We're doing some reviews of some chocolate bars or something. It's a long few moments where I think he realized what I was trying to work out how to say, and he said, I'll show you how to use our gear. You're probably not used to it. Thanks. But anyway, that made me realize that I needed to learn how to light stuff. And so that sent me on a journey to learn to light. And it was perfect because two things were going on. The internet. So people were just starting to share their knowledge. There's a brilliant blog by a guy, David Hobby, called Strobist, and a ton of other great lighting resources online. And the second thing that was superb is we were all at that stage, and including me, everyone was shooting digital, where you could take a photo, you could get it really badly wrong, and you'd see that pretty quickly in the back of the camera. So I started teaching myself how to light. And then, of course, the next thing was, I didn't have much money, and as you can see, I'm not the most muscly guy in the world, so I didn't want to be carrying all this heavy gear with me. So I was using my Speedlights, my little small flashes, these things. And it's amazing what you can do with them, but they're pretty small and they're very powerful. So you get very, very hard-edged shadows with them. And as you know, like some of the time, you can bounce the light from your flash. If you're lucky enough that you've got a good ceiling, you've got a good wall nearby, they're either white or a fairly neutral color, and the thing that you're photographing is just in the right place between you and them that you can bounce the light, which is great when that happens. The moment your subject moves, or you find yourself in most of the places that we're in where you can't bounce the flash, you've suddenly got an issue. So of course you can set up brollies with light stands and big soft boxes and things like that, and you can start to change the size of your light source, which is really important to make it look like it's not over flashed. And so I was doing that, but a couple of things. It was kind of annoying. Try setting a big brolly up outside when there's any more than the tiny breeze, and it'll soon blow over, and when it blows over it snaps and your flash breaks, and the people that you're there to photograph look at you strangely, and you suddenly realize that you can't shoot them anymore, and you've got a big bill to fix your nightmare. So started doing off-camera flash, where I'm holding it out at the end of my arm to just start playing around with some of the other lighting effects you can get from these Speedlights, but you're not changing the size of the flash. So you're still getting hard-edged shadows. That's fine some of the time, but a lot of the time, really, you kind of want that nice complementary look to the things that you're photographing. So it was at that point that I started playing around with building my own lighting gear. And I settled on this kind of one design, and for some reason it didn't work, and I kept going back at it. Over about the course of a year, I'd toddle into my garage and I'd risk cutting my fingers with my box cutters a little bit more, and eventually I had this lighting modifier, this lighting accessory that worked really well, and everyone I was photographing with it were looking at the photos going, how did you do that? Did you make that? I did. Well, that's fine, but of course I was doing a bit of commercial photography as well, and using gear made of duct tape and tin foil, aluminum foil, is not a great look when you're expecting people to pay you money to take their photo. So one fateful day in 2006, I sat down at my computer. I was in New Zealand at the time, B&H Photo. I knew what I needed, and they didn't sell it. And I thought, wait a minute, if these guys don't sell it, no one will. And sure enough, an hour later, I discovered it didn't exist. And that was the point that set me on this journey that brings me to where I am today. Because that was the point I went, hang on, if I want this, and I would have bought one in an instant, because I need this beautiful lighting from my flashes, maybe a few other people will. Maybe this is something I should look into. And so that's when the journey started. So obviously, as I mentioned, when we're talking small flash, going back to what I was saying, I'm just going to run you through some photos here, obviously. Very, very hard-edged shadows. It's not always a terrible thing, but often we want to soften them a little bit. We want to have a little bit more control over what we've got. So the next thing that you could do is you could go off camera, which is where you could put your flash on a light stand, or you can have it out at arm's length. But you've not done anything to change the size of your light source, the actual little light here. So you're not doing anything really to change the quality of the light. And so that's where the Orbis ring flash comes in, which is my thing, which is what I'd been playing around with. I'd made them out of duct tape and tinfoil, and then I thought, no, I really need to step this up. More people want this lighting effect, and I want to get something, a finished accessory that looks and works really, really well. And that's where the Orbis was born. And so the Orbis works with any flash, fits every flash gun you've got, and you just put it in the bottom here. There are a couple of ways of using it, so I'm just showing it to you handheld in its kind of simplest way. And what you immediately get is, how I describe it is, beautiful shadowless light, quickly and easily, anywhere, every time. Because what it does is it reshapes the light. And so when I'm at a trade show, and I hope I see you guys at Photo Plus later on in the year, and you'll be able to see sort of some me doing this live, is you go from very, very hard-edged shadows to an amazing lighting effect without needing to change any settings. Because all of your camera's TTL settings, the through the lens, the metering settings, all of that, all work perfectly when you're using the Orbis. So you go from this to that kind of lighting effect, and I'm playing a little bit with her hair, but you see what I mean. Really lovely shadowless light, quickly and easily. And because it's the ring shape, what you're doing when you're using it in its simplest form is you're pushing your lens through the hole in the middle. Is from the camera's point of view, from the camera's perspective, there is light coming from every direction. So you get this beautiful shadowless lighting effect, and as you can see there, you get that lovely ring in your model's eyes, or the catch lights. They look great. There are no straight lines in nature, so the moment that you get sort of square-sided softbox catch lights, it always looks a little bit strange, which you never get with the Orbis. And of course, some of you who have played around with lighting before will know that what we're actually doing here is we're getting ring flash light. But ring flash light, generally, until the Orbis, meant investing in a ring flash. Thousands of dollars, really heavy, high-end studio equipment. And ring flashes have been around since the 50s and the 60s. But I couldn't afford one, and I certainly didn't want to be carrying one around with me. The Orbis gives you that $1 million ring flash effect for a fraction of the cost, and it's much easier to use because, as you can see, it doesn't sit on top of your camera. You use the Orbis with your flash firing off camera. And you can do that in a few different ways. So I've got a Nikon D300 here, and it's very simple and very easy to set it up, and I'm hoping that I've set it up right, to set it up so the little pop-up flash here fires this flash. And I'll show you later, I'll put you on to the link to our website, but we've got a quick and easy setup video that shows you how to do this with Nikon. So don't look at this because this is about to fire, but when I press this, that should fire. So of course what that means is, I normally have a strap, but I'm going to put this on a tripod later on, so I've taken the strap off because I've got a strap that goes on the tripod socket. So what this means is, when you're shooting with a Nikon, you get that really amazing ring flash light really quickly and easily without needing to use an off-camera cord, which is another way that you can connect your flash to your camera. Canon cameras, the SLRs, also do this out of the box. The flashes can fire without needing to be on the hot shoe. The reason it's not on the hot shoe is because you want to be able to get the lens through the middle for that great lighting effect. Now, if you don't want to be hand holding it, you can also get an optional extra, which is the Orbis arm, which connects the bottom of your camera to the bottom of your flash. The Orbis arm you're left with the Orbis lighting system, and you can mount the whole thing on a tripod. If you've got a zoom lens as well, it makes it much easier to zoom in and out. The reason that I don't use the Orbis arm is just my personal preference. Because you see, what I like doing is being able to walk into a room with the Orbis on my shoulder, camera on my other shoulder. You can mix it up then. You can take some going back to natural light, now that we know what we're doing with flash, you can take some natural light photos You can bring the orbis up, you can push the lens through the hole in the middle here, and then there's more. It's not free steak knives. It's that great lighting effect that I'm showing you here, right? That sort of ring flash lighting effect, that shadowless lighting effect, you get because of the way we design the orbis. It reshapes the light. That's what makes it unique as a lighting modifier. All the other lighting modifiers, they'll change the size, they'll change the spread, but this reshapes the light. But what it's also doing is it leaves you with a light source that's the same size and shape as your face. Much bigger than this. And that, if you remember, the size of the light source is why you're getting those very, very hard-edged shadows. And so you can also take it away from your camera and have it off camera, off to one side, and be shooting with the orbis exactly like it's a softbox. So you get soft directional lighting, so a very different look. And you can handhold it, or you can put it on a light stand. So what I mean by that is there. So I've just turned my model to one side a little bit. I'm holding the orbis in front of her face. And as you can see, the light's coming across really beautifully. But if you look down here and around the edges of the light, there's a really nice soft feathering of the light. It's kind of real gentle fall off there. And yet again, you know, you can play around with it at that point. You can take it off to the side and shoot straight on if you want. So you can really get a number of different, very, very cool effects, all based around the fact that it's not only a ring, but it's much larger. And the great thing is about this, going back to the title of Kick the Natural Light Habit, is it's not to take away from the fact that I really like natural light. You know, it's a beautiful way to photograph. But one of the things that I often find is you can't rely on it to be there all the time. And if you're shooting whenever you like, whatever you like, if the lighting isn't perfect, doesn't matter, don't get the shot. But it's really awesome to be able to get beautiful lighting, have it at your fingertips in your camera bag when you need it, without knowing that it's going to look over-flashed and really, really hard-edged and a little bit weird and horrible. And you can get that with the orbis, as you can see. You can get a number of different effects quickly and easily. And if you check this, look for this photo on our blog, we've got this nice little article which was, you know, 3 completely different portraits in 60 seconds. There's the natural light one, there's the sort of the classic ring flash studio effect, and then there's off camera where you've got that lovely softbox, and you put it over the top of the camera, and I'm not sure, I think I might have taken it out, but I'll grab the photo in a minute from somewhere else. You put it over the camera and you get a very particular beauty dish effect, because I don't know, you guys have probably seen, if you've either shot in studio or you've seen studio photography on TV, a lot of the time when you're in studio, a great way of lighting is having a beauty dish, which is sort of a big round softbox just above and behind you, shooting down over your head. It's great if you've got the big boom and the sandbags and the assistants in the studio space, but with the orbis you can get that on location by lifting your camera up and shooting with the orbis just over the top of the camera. Top-down lighting, so for a very different effect and very different mood, but again, the very, very soft kind of fall off of the shadows. And of course, the orbis does play really well with other lights, because it's fun to use other second speed lights. And so what I'd done in this photo here was it's a very high key look. You know, it's way overexposed on purpose, because it's kind of a, you know, Studio 54 kind of nightclub kind of feel. And so what I'd done there is I've got a second flash on a light stand behind my model, kind of breaking the rules a little bit. I'd set that flash up really powerfully to fire straight into the camera. So nearly blowing the whole thing out in terms of the highlights and things. But of course, because it's behind her, her face would have been completely lost. So what I did there is I brought the orbis up in front, still firing on TTL, because I don't really want to worry about where she is, where I am, am I close, am I far away, and using the orbis just to fill and get that lovely effect on her face. Because as I mentioned, when I was describing why you get the orbis to fire off, with the flash to fire off camera and not on the camera, the other cool thing is all of the sensors here, as you can see, on the front of your flash that help your camera and your flash work out the metering. and help them work out all the focus assist and all the little things like that. All work perfectly. They can see the subject and not obstructed at all. And so if you're just firing the Orbis against white plain background, you can kind of see the effect there. You do get this lovely little slight darkened shadow that's perfectly uniform all the way around your whoever it is you're shooting. And now I'm shooting a lot of people here, a lot of portraits, a lot of model photography, but the Orbis, of course, ring flash is very commonly used for macro photography, for very, very short range stuff, photographing jewelry, product photography, insects, frogs, snakes, wildlife, that kind of thing. And of course you can get LED macro ring lights, but the limitation with those is the moment that you want to move away from photographing about 3 or 4 inches away from what you're shooting, they just don't have enough power. With the Orbis, you can do the macro stuff and the product photography, but then you can also come back and do portraits 3/4 length or even full length, which is of course up to 8 people if you're doing group photos as well. Now I put that in there partly because that's my daughter, but also because one of the things that you probably know, right, is shooting fast-moving objects, children, dogs, cats. They're great subjects to photograph, but they move really fast. And they move really fast so that when you've set some lights up, you'll look around and they're not there anymore. And that often half the time running after them, you or the other people you're with in the house are going to trip over the light stands and things. And so as you've noticed, one of the cool thing about the Orbis is it's always with you. Whether you're using it handheld or whether you've got it on the Orbis arm on your camera, the moment that the little critter that you're photographing is running away, you can just kind of follow them. And you know that nothing's going to get in the way, nothing's going to get knocked over or blown over if you're outdoors on what. I was at a trade show in Germany a few weeks ago, and it was an outdoor photo show. So I had a lot of people coming up to me saying, well, what I shoot animals, why would I ever want anything like the Orbis? Well, I've only got one photo here, but it's pretty cool. As I mentioned, we get a lot of people using them out on location for smaller wildlife. But this was taken at a falconry centre. This was a huge Eurasian hunting owl, I think. And I was pretty sure that owls, as we all know, that can see at night, would be pretty freaked out by flash photography. I think horses are. And a lot of animal handlers are very set about no flash photography, zoos, no flash photography. Anyway, I asked the guy who somehow was balancing this big, monstrous bird on his arm, may I? He said, absolutely, totally cool, which really surprised me. I had to go and get my gear from the car to shoot this because I was so expecting not being able to flash photos around these animals. But the result's pretty cool. Lovely, shadowless light. The catch light in the eyes is something that I really like, but it is worth noting that if you don't like it or you think it's distracting or you want to get rid of it, unlike big sort of softbox accessories and things like that, when you're shooting with the Orbis, the catch light's always in the pupil. So if you need to get rid of it, it's really easy to do that in post-processing when you've got it open, because you're not in the iris, you're not in the colored bit of the eye, you can very quickly just clone it out. I never do, because I think it's part of this nice little magic of what makes this lovely $1 million kind of ring flash effect. And also it just makes whatever you're shooting pop a little bit more. It adds a little bit of sparkle to their eyes, which is quite cool. Now, here's an example of what I was saying earlier, but there's something else going on here. So, as I mentioned, off camera is a little softbox. You can hold it out like this really quickly and easily. But one of the things that you can do is put it on a light stand. So here I've got the Orbis on a light stand so I can get that directional light. But can anyone else see what else is going on in this photo?
Color change?
Color change. So there we go. Very good. Thank you. What I'm doing here is something kind of fun and a little bit experimental, because you've always got to fine-tune the results. But what I did was I shifted the white balance of my camera completely off the scale. I'm pretty sure it was a tungsten white balance, which outside meant that everything looks really blue. Now, most of the time that you do that is when you accidentally switch the white balance out and wonder why everything's blue. But What I then did was I put a gel on my flash to counteract that, and then I put my Orbis on my flash. So as you can see, the pool of light that he's in from the Orbis actually is what we'd expect. Those are his real skin tones, but everything else is this really nice eerie blue color. And it's kind of nice. Obviously, you know, that wouldn't normally be the end photo. I'd be a lot closer than that, but I wanted to get the Orbis in there. But the cool thing about that is it just helps you separate your portrait subject from the background. And it's kind of a fun thing to do. Gels don't cost very much, and it's a really fun little experiment. It's also useful if you're shooting for magazines, newspapers, that kind of thing. You can actually use it as quite to help separate the whatever you're shooting from the background, and also to help tell the story of the photo that you're shooting. Now, one of the other things that's in here that I should probably mention is the way that I've put my gear onto my light stand, which is using one of these little things, which is another one of my inventions. It's called the Frio. So it's the world's best cold shoe. Someone told me the other day I'm not allowed to say that. Someone's going to sue me because I can't say that. But I'll qualify it with why it's the best cold shoe ever. Cold shoes obviously are the best. You need your cold shoe. The moment you start playing around with Speedlight flashes and putting them onto light stands, you're going to need a cold shoe, because it basically is an adapter to go from your hot shoe to your tripod. And the challenge is cold shoes have been around for decades, but flashes have changed massively in the last 10 years. And you probably know, right? You guys, you've got the flashes with the little, most likely, you flick the switch at the back and it locks onto your camera when you're using it on camera. 15, 20 years ago, all of the flashes, and you probably still got some, I've still got a couple of these, you'd screw down the little collar and it would lock in place. But what happened when they stopped putting the screws in and they started putting the switches in is that suddenly you couldn't reliably lock your flash onto almost every cold shoe out there because they didn't have their own locks in them. And so what I did with the cold shoe is, with the Frio, is I've put, it's called dual lock, 2 locks. So if I've got one here. So I've just put one on a little portable tripod here. So the moment that you put your flash onto the Frio, it locks in place. It's not going anywhere, because there's this little catch that's popped up. Now, I always say you do have to put that little second switch on to that's the double lock, right? These flashes, as you know, cost an arm and a leg, so you don't want them hitting the deck. With the Frio, totally safe and secure. They've also got a little lanyard thing on the front so you can hang a pocket wizard or a radio slave from it. But really nice way, because the cool thing is as well, it means that as long as you've got your tripod with you, you've also got a light stand, which means you have to carry less and you can do more with what you've got, which I'm all about. Now, the Frios also, they've just changed. There's a new one coming out in the next few days, which is new and improved. The big difference with the new one is it's just got a little dual thread on the bottom. So if you've got older light stands with the big 3/8 threads on them, you can easily adapt the Frio to go on your traditional light stands as well. And so that's how I've mounted my whole sort of setup on there to get that shot. Now, you remember I mentioned, of course, that you can hold it out here as a softbox. You can have it on as a shadowless ring flash thing, but you can also hold it over the top as a beauty dish. So that is an example of that. So we'd just gone round the corner. It was about 15 minutes after that photo that you've just seen was taken, because we just walked down front of a church door, sat the guy I was shooting down, and here's a photo where I'm just in front of him and I'm just holding my Orbis above the lens. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm just holding it just like, was it? Yes, it was. Just like that. So we've got a top-down kind of lighting effect. And hang on, I'm going to turn this down so I can actually shoot and you can see it in action without me blinding you. Here we go. So just like this. Really cool lighting effect without the hard edge shadows that you'd normally get if your flash was sitting on top of the camera. And so up next, sorry, the slides are actually in a bit of an odd order here, but you remember I was saying, now I've been doing a lot of hand holding, and I know that's not for everyone, because I remember when I was first had my first real SLR camera, I think I was 14 or 15, and someone took me to one side, I was holding it like this. And someone took me to one side and kind of reminded me that really, as you guys probably all know, you really want to be holding your camera, cradling the weight and the lens in your left hand, so that this hand is just doing the shutter and the controls, which means that you can shoot much slower shutter speeds than you normally would without getting any sort of camera shake. But of course, all of that goes out the window with what I've been doing with the Orbis, because I've been holding it all up here and around here and things like that. Now, I'm using faster shutter speeds, and also I've had a lot of practice doing it, but if you're using a zoom lens as well, you kind of want this hand-free to zoom. And so that was what I mentioned earlier, which was the optional Orbis arm that you can get there. As you can see, it's Z-shaped, so it adjusts through 6 ways. So it works with the long lenses and the short lenses. It means that you can zoom your lenses if you want to. It locks the Orbis into the Orbis system, so you're shooting with that kind of $1 million ring flash effect that you've seen in those photos earlier. So you can't easily then get it off camera, but it's cool because it's the system. It's one thing to think about. The whole thing can go on your shoulder, and you can mount it all on tripod, so it's great for sort of macro photos and studio shoots and things like that. So that kind of brings me to the end of like a short introduction to how I went from being a natural light photographer exclusively, because the reality was I was a little bit scared of starting to learn to light. I went to the other extreme where I lit everything, and then sort of came back a little bit, and through that process came up with the idea of the Orbis and launched it. Do I use it for every shot all the time? Absolutely not. I don't, I'll always have it with me because it's dead useful, but I won't always shoot with it. I'll sometimes still be a natural light photographer. And this was one of the most interesting things for me about that journey, was when I spent a fun, few months playing around with flash and finding out what it could do, and finding out the difference between having it here and here, here and here, on camera, off camera, starting to train my mind about where light comes from and what it looks like when it's a particular shape. What I found now is I'm a much better natural light photographer than I ever was, because I can now kind of see the shape of the light and the direction of it, and how hard or soft it is, and is it sunlight that's direct, or is it coming off a building, or is it already bouncing off the wall, or that kind of thing. So it's made me all around a much better photographer. But of course, there isn't always the perfect natural light coming from the right direction, and when there isn't, the closest thing that I've ever found to get that lovely sort of unobtrusive, unflashed, almost natural light, shadowless look is the Orbis. So that is an introduction to my sort of journey through using demystifying Speedlight photography, Speedlight flash. You can find us at nlightphotopro.com. So we've got a blog there full of hints and tips. We've got an Nlight TV channel full of a lot of what I've explained to you, where you can see the Orbis in action. The Orbis is available here today at B&H. It's normally $179, and I've been told today that they're doing a special deal today, I think today and tomorrow only. If you've got any questions though, now's perfect time. And there we go, there was Manj there. Sir?
When you're attached to your Orbis though, how many stops do you lose, or do you not lose any stops?
That's a very good question. So how much light, so if you didn't hear that, when you attach the Orbis, how many stops of light do you lose? So, of course, the Orbis uses some of the light coming from the flash to transform and reshape the light. So you lose about 1.5 stops of light. So that's a kind of a technical term, but the important thing to remember there is I am always shooting with my flash set to TTL. So you never actually notice it, because your flash, the moment you put it in an Orbis, when you're shooting with it, and this is happening faster than the blink of an eye. It's faster than the opening and closing of a shutter at 1/60th or a 200th of a second. The camera system is aware of how much light the flash is putting out, and at the point that the exposure is well lit, it'll turn the flash off. Kind of sounds a bit incredible, but that's what's going on. And so that's the basics of how the sort of a through the lens metering system works. So you can go from, when I'm demonstrating live, I'll have my flash off camera here doing just a bare flash photography, a few examples of that where you're getting those very hard edge shadows. And then I'll put the flash into the orbit, and I don't need to change any settings because the TTL metering will automatically make the flash fire a little bit more than it had just done. So you get the same beautifully exposed shot. So most of the time, it's about 1.5 stops, but you don't need to worry about it. Cool. So that kind of brings me to the end. Now I'm allowing enough time at the end as well. We're not going to go right up to 3 o'clock. So at the end of the sort of the next section, we're ideally we're going to be left with a good 20 minutes of just general chat. So if you want to come up, have a closer look at this gear that I've got with me, and ask me any more questions, then we'll have plenty of time for that at the end. But what I'm going to do now is quickly switching over to a different presentation. I'm now going to move on to the second bit, which is less about lighting and more about, here we go, long exposures and time-lapse photography. So learning about long exposures and shooting time-lapse. And this kind of came about because I was on holiday, beautiful coastline. This was when I was still living in New Zealand, and stunning night skies. And I'd met some guys who were staying in the same place that my family was staying. And one of them was a very keen amateur photographer. And he said, I really, really want to be shooting some amazing light trail photos of the night sky and the stars. He said, why can't I do that why can't my iPhone control my camera? Carry my iPhone with me everywhere. Should be able to control my camera. And I said, oh yeah, you can definitely do that. And I had my my phone as well. And so I pulled the browser up and I showed him some of the systems that he could use to do that. And he pointed out to me that all of those systems were all very high-end studio-oriented tethering systems. And he said, I'm on holiday. I'm not carrying a laptop with me or a computer and a trolley everywhere I go. I just want to plug my iPhone into my camera. Great, I said, finishing my coffee, thinking not much more of it. But then what happened was interesting. As I was asleep that night, or half asleep, I kind of thought, well, that's interesting, that what he was saying. iPhones have got calendars in them. That's kind of cool. Timers, yeah. And they've got movement sensors in. Oh, it's kind of interesting, triggering your camera with movement. They've got microphones in. Ah, could do sound triggers. They're basically, as we know, computers that happen to also be telephones. And I got quite excited by it. And that's when I suddenly thought, well, okay, we all know that we can get shutter release cables and we can get time-lapse controllers and things like that, but surely doing this with your phone, which you've always got with you and is way easier to use than anything with a tiny sort of LCD display, has got to be a good thing. And so that's what led me to start looking into long exposure photography and time-lapse photography, which I didn't really have a background in. It was more, as you know, the press photography and that kind of thing. So one of the things I'm going to be talking about is one of my other little gadgets called IO Shutter, but it's all about getting great, easy, long exposures and shooting time-lapse and some other cool things as well that you can do with it. So that was a little introduction into obviously a lot of time-lapse stuff. Now, just out of curiosity, how many of you guys have done time-lapse photography? Ooh, cool, quite a few. And sort of long exposure stuff as well, like 30 seconds, 2 minutes. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm kind of preaching to the converted with some of you, but I'm going to lead the rest of you guys on a little journey, which was getting into it. Now, I'd been shooting, this is another thing that I'd been shooting, you know, car photography, where you often see these photos and you kind of think, before I taught myself or learned how to do these, I always assumed that the cars were ripping along at great high speed, but actually 9 times out of 10 that you're doing this, you're pushing the car manually whilst the engine is off to kind of reduce any vibrations and stuff. So you're using about 15-20 second exposure for that. And this is one of the cool things, you know, there are often a lot more instances where you can use really long exposures to get some really interesting effects than you'd otherwise have expected. But as with so many things, you know, it's one of those kind of functions that we often don't dive into. You know, getting down below a 30th or a 15th or a 10th of a second, you're generally starting to find a lot of camera shake with whatever you do, even when you've got your camera on a tripod. What I really have started to enjoy doing is getting it to the 1, 2, 5, 10 second, 15 second, because of course at that point the camera starts to see things going on that you can't actually normally see with the naked eye. And so going back, this was a perfect example of that. You know, the smoke and the fire there looked nothing like that. But by putting it on a 15, 20 second, I don't actually remember, it was at least 20 seconds, a 20 second shutter speed, way slower than you normally would, it becomes a completely different scene. And it's kind of fun to do this, because sometimes when you're experimenting, and again, going back to what I was saying with shooting with the Orbis and teaching yourself to learn how to light, the great thing with all of this stuff is we can instantly see whether we've got it right. And if we haven't, there's not really much cost in doing that, because you can just delete the photo in the same way than there was with film. Not sure. And yet, of course, here at the other end of the spectrum, you've got ultra fast shutter speeds where things are very different. One of the other things that often starts to come into it is, so here, apart from the fact that you get this kind of nice painterly sort of look with the tree because the breeze is kind of blowing it back and forth, another one of the reasons that you want to start maybe experimenting with much, much slower shutter speeds is you also start to get this really interesting effect with the lights. So street lights, or stationary lights, not the ones that you'd start to see trailing up and down, turn into these kind of amazing multi-point stars. And I think there's something connected with the number of irises in your aperture or whatever equates to the number of points to the star or something like that. But really, really cool sort of other effects that you can start getting when you start really, really slowing those shutter speeds down. Along with the slow shutter speeds and time-lapse and other stuff, of course, as I think I may have mentioned, one of the other great things about having this control that you get from putting the shutter button in the palm of your hand, as you can with IO shutter or with shutter release systems like IO shutter, is that a lot of the time we wonder, you know, one of the hardest things to photograph are people. It's hard to photograph people because if you don't know them, it's a challenge to walk up to people and shoot them. It's kind of nerve-wracking to ask people's permission. Those are things that you just have to get over by trying them and doing them, because you'd be amazed that I've never had anyone turn me down when I walk up to them in the street and either just shoot them without asking anything, or I say, hey, do you mind if I take your portrait? But that aside, one of the other things that makes it very hard to photograph people is actually getting people to relax in front of the camera. Now, one of the ways you can do that, of course, is just by relaxing yourself and improving the way that you relate to your models and the people you're shooting. But one of the other things that I found is one of the biggest barriers to getting people to act natural in front of the camera is the fact that there is the camera as a barrier between you and them. We're worried about this thing that we're shooting, and actually we're forgetting that what people are looking at isn't us. It's this, you know, big black piece of technology, or sometimes silvered bit of technology, this machine, so they don't really feel like they're relating to someone. Now, a little trick that I used to do when I was running around as a press photographer is if I noticed that someone was really, really nervous and I was shooting them, I'd start shooting them with my right eye at the viewfinder so that most of my face was outside away from the camera, and I can also see what they're doing and talk directly to them. But then one of the other things that I started doing is I'd frame the people up, and then I'd just bring my face off to one side, and I can then shoot and talk, and you're either still looking at the camera or you're looking so close to the camera's lens axis that it's very hard to tell in the photo. And suddenly people are talking to a person, to you, to me, and they relax a lot more. And you see that in the photos. But of course, if you're in studio, or you're not in as much of a hurry as I used to be when I was working for newspapers, it can just be as simple as putting your camera onto a tripod and getting out from behind the camera. And having the shutter button in the palm of your hand makes that much, much easier to do, much more intuitive kind of thing. So, there's just a photograph of an example of what I'm talking about. Not just for sort of single people, but when you have to control big groups of people like that, it can be quite a challenge to make sure that everyone's standing in the right place, everyone's looking at you when they need to be. And so again, getting out from behind your camera makes a world of difference to the way that people look and the way that you can control them as well. So, and that's an example of a corporate photo shoot that I had to do. One of the other tips there is that I would always go and measure out where I needed the people, and then make sure that you put something down on the grass so that you can guide people into where they need to stand. You always have a moment of hilarity, because I used to use lens caps. So the first thing that would happen is the first person out from the corporate training that they'd just been doing would walk out into the field and find a lens cap and pick it up and go, wait, you dropped this. And then of course you point out something, they've ruined the whole photo shoot, and you have to start everything over again, and everyone laughs, everyone relaxes, and you're away. But so just to give you an idea, that was the photo, and then this is what it becomes. And you can do this without I/O shutter, without a shutter release, but it transforms your ability to do these kinds of things, even before you get into the fun time-lapse long exposure stuff. So I was on holiday a few weeks ago, and I really wanted to do some of this long exposure photography. So I waited till the kids were in bed, grabbed my tripod, my camera, and my I/O shutter cable. Of course, I have my iPhone with me all the time. Who doesn't? And I headed down to the beach. And so I framed up a boat that was just floating about 20 meters offshore. And I set my I/O shutter app to a 30-second exposure. I think I was on f8 because I wanted a really nice long depth of field. I didn't really want anything out of focus. I could see that there were slight waves, so I knew that we were going to get a little bit of bobbing of the boat that was going to kind of give it this slightly painterly, almost impressionist kind of feel, and I hit the shutter button. The other great thing is I have had other shutter release cables, but using one when it's really, really dark is next to impossible because you just can't see what you're doing. And with I/O shutter, because you've got the display on your phone controlling the camera, it's really great when it's after dark because your phone, obviously, you can always see it. But as you can see, it's underexposed. Didn't really work. I wanted the depth of field. It's night, so I didn't want to bump the ISO up because everything was going to start getting grainy. So I simply dived into my I/O shutter, and afterwards I'll show you it working. I've got a big iPad here so you can see it working. And I went from 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And I got that. So the challenge here is not quite there. I've got more. Everything's a little bit lighter. You can start to see the stars moving a little bit, which is kind of interesting, but it's still not the photo that I really want. So again, very easy. I don't want to change the ISO because it'll get grainy. I don't want to stop down to f2.8 or f4.5 because then I'm going to start getting things are going to start being blurred, not because they're moving, but because I've got a very narrow depth of field. So 120 seconds, and perfect. Really, really interesting photo. Now, whilst I was doing this, I'd heard something going on behind me, Didn't know what it was, looked around, and I noticed that the ferry had come in and docked for the last, having just done the last trip of the night across the bay. So I now knew, the sun had gone down, I know what I'm dealing with now. I've got the right exposure, I'm at f8, I think it was ISO 400, a shutter speed of 120 seconds. So it was a very simple matter to swivel my camera around, and I got my favourite photo of the evening, which was the ferry having docked. You know, you've got this really nice effect on the light there that I described. The sun had gone down like half an hour, 45 minutes before. As far as I was concerned, it was pretty close to being pitch black. But you suddenly see in the long exposures this stuff happening that you can't see with the naked eye, which is this lovely light still hanging in the sky, which makes the blues even deeper blue. But of course, you're also adding to it the fact that the waves are lapping onto the shore, so you start getting this magical effect happening in the waves at your feet. The kind of stuff that really, you know, I used to be a press photographer, right? And suddenly I've seen this kind of thing in magazines. I've spoken to a guy who said I should be able to plug my iPhone into my camera. It seems like a good idea. I've, you know, spent a lot of time and effort developing this system, and this was really cool for me, because this was the first time that I'd tested it and I'd made sure it worked really well. But this was the first time that I was out and about really playing with it and enjoying it and going, whoa, now I can shoot those kind of photos that I've seen in the magazines with the really dreamy sort of seascapes and things like that. You'll also stream, you know, river streams and waterfalls and stuff. Works really well for that. And so fast forward a few months after that, similar kind of deal. I was here in New York a little while ago and went out shooting. And already then I'm starting, now I always look for water wherever I go now, because it's kind of, I know that you're going to get that really nice, gentle effect. And as you can see, same as before, I'm also getting that really cool, those cool effects on the bridges too. So that's long exposure. And I hope I've kind of whetted your appetites a little bit to go out and try playing around with it. Time-lapse, of course, is something different. I know quite a few of you put your hands up when I said, have you shot time-lapse? Time-lapse, I always describe it simply as controlling time, because that's what it looks like you're doing. And simply, it's taking photos at intervals for a long time, and then in any one of a number of software applications, either some of them are very, very simple, or just like anything. You can do them very simply, or you can do them very real complicated, time-consuming stuff, is stitching those photos together so that they're at the same speed as a normal movie. So a normal movie that you see on screen will be 24 frames, I think, 25 frames a second. With a time-lapse film, with a normal film, if I held a video camera up, the video camera will be shooting 25 frames a second, and then we play it back so it looks like we look. Time-lapse, of course, you're shooting a photo maybe every 2, 5, or 10, or 15 seconds. So suddenly, when you mash those photos down after you've shot them to display on your screen at 25 frames a second, everything is hugely sped up. And if you haven't ever done it yourself, you'll definitely have seen it. It's in movies, documentaries, it's on TV all the time. You know, when you see the clouds tearing across the sky way quicker than you'd think possible, that's time-lapse at play. Like the long exposures, it's incredibly easy to do, surprisingly easy to do, but it's something that we often don't play with. It doesn't just have to be cool clouds and people in cities and things like that. I had my 5-year-old daughter bought her first Lego kit a few months ago. And so I set IO Shutter up in the kitchen, and we shot her in a time-lapse building her first Lego kit. So there are all sorts of ways you can use it. Now, here's an even stranger application for time-lapse, which was when I shot this car. So a car magazine phoned me up and said, we've got this car, we need to shoot it, it's got to be done today, and you can't use a studio, we don't have a big budget, so can you make it happen? Now, does anyone want to guess how many studio lights I used to light the car?
4.
4. Okay. 2. None?
None. Is it one and a composite?
One. Oh, prize to the man at the front, and someone else who I think said one as well. So I shot this with one light. The funniest thing was when they turned up with the car and I got a single, in fact, I think it was this exact light out, and I got this out, you could hear them start muttering to themselves, what have we done here? So what I did was lock the camera down so the camera can't move. Make sure no one's going to touch it, trip over on it, because the camera cannot move at all. And then what I did was I proceeded to take about 30 or 40 photos where I lit little pools of light all over the car as I walked around it. And I did that by setting my camera up to take a photo every 10 seconds. The flash, just as I would normally be firing with the Orbis, the little pop-up flash here was triggering my flash as I walked around the car. And every 10 seconds I'd pop and I'd move along, another photo, move along, another photo, and then along the top of the car, photos along the top, and I think I even did a couple through the window. And then what happened is I then had 40 photos, horrible photos, where everything's like dark except for maybe the half of the front wing and then the wheel. And then it's a surprisingly simple process of pulling all of the photos into Photoshop. So you've got 40 layers in the Photoshop document. And then you go into the little layers palette in the bottom right, and you click on the drop-down box, and you change the blending mode to lighten. And all that says to Photoshop is, let the lightest part of every one of these layers show through the layer above it. And you need to do a little bit of tweaking after that, but really, the moment that you set that blending mode to lighten, you pretty much get that appearing off your screen. So needless to say, the editors of the magazine were quite relieved the next day when I emailed them that photo, closely followed by calling me up saying, how did you do that? We were standing in the room, we saw what happened, and you didn't like that at any point, anything like that. But, you know, so this was actually shot with time-lapse. Just a very different way of using time-lapse than you'd normally think of doing. So I hope that's kind of led you a little bit through some interesting applications of long exposures and time-lapse and why you might want to. Most of this stuff was shot using IO shutter, which I've been talking to you about, which I can quickly show you now. So I've set my camera up on the tripod as you'd normally have it. Now IO shutter, which is one of these, connects your iPhone to your SLR camera. Can also work with your iPod Touch, and it also works with your iPad. Most of the time I'm using my iPhone or my iPod Touch. I'm going to run it on an iPad now quickly so that you can see it because it's a nice big screen, but it's easy to run on your iPhone. And so what it does is you get hold of IO shutter, and then you download the app from the App Store and get shooting. And so what we're going to do now, I've already plugged one in. It connects to the headphone jack, so it works with iPhone 5, older iPhones, older iPod Touches, iPad, iPad mini, all of that. And so, as you'd expect, first glance, it looks like something that you recognize. Now, as I said, iPad so that you can all see it, but really when I'm running it on, where did I put my little device? When I'm running it on my iPhone, it's the button obviously falls naturally under your thumb, so it's super easy to use. And so the first thing is, it's a shutter release cable. So whether you're shooting very slow shutter speeds or just quite slow shutter speeds, it means you can shoot the moment that you need to get the photo without touching the camera. Because even when you've got your camera on a tripod, as you'll know, a lot of the time just the action of pressing the shutter can move it enough to give you some motion blur and lose that pin-sharp focus of the photo that you want. Yep, you could. There's a little trick. If you don't have your IO shutter with you, you can of course use the countdown timer where you press it and then step back. Well, that's great, but if you want to get the car coming past in just the right part of the frame, or the people passing by in just the right part of the frame, you need to be able to control when the camera fires. If you've got it on autofocus, the autofocus works just as it normally would. You can hold the shutter down, which is great for either motor drive, like that, for taking sequences of photos. It's also great if you've set your camera to the bulb mode, where when you press the shutter it opens, and when you let go it closes, because you can then get that kind of control with your IO shutter cable. And there's a little timer here so you can see how long the shutter's been open for. But it's when you get into the extra drawer, the functions drawer, that it starts to get cool. And I'll rip through this so that you guys can have some questions, and if you want to have a closer look, come up and see me afterwards and you can have a closer play. But you can do countdown timers. You can do scheduled timers. So if you want to get the time lapse, say, of the sun coming up, I don't know about you, I don't like setting my alarm real early. So I kind of like, I don't have to work out how many hours away dawn is. You can go tomorrow morning, start shooting a photo every 3 seconds at 5 a.m. Leave your camera set up on the balcony or whatever. Bulb, for those long exposures, you can open the shutter for 20 minutes, half an hour, 2 hours in the dead of night to get the stars moving across the night sky with the, meteor showers and things like that, which is very cool. Time lapse, simply setting the camera to take a photo every few seconds, every few minutes. Generally, if I'm doing people and I want to get people moving around or clouds moving around, I'll go every 2 seconds. And for slower things, if you're shooting like boats coming in and out of a harbor or up and down the Hudson, every 5 or 10 seconds is cool. If you're doing stuff like that, every 10, 15 seconds as well is great. And then, of course, we've got sound trigger and the movement trigger as well. The sound trigger is surprisingly useful because I got a phone call a few weeks ago from a photographer who uses the sound trigger to do photos like this with studio lighting gear. Whereas he moves the studio lighting gear, he'll just say now and the camera will fire, now and the camera will fire. He doesn't need to keep walking to and from the camera. He doesn't need to have the lights moved in only 10 seconds. He can do it at his leisure and fine-tune things. And he used to do it with a wireless release, but of course that meant that he had to have a hand free all the time. So he uses the sound trigger in IO shutter to get his photography done much better. And then there's a shake to take, which I always envisioned would, wildlife photographers would set up little traps and things with their iPod touches and stuff. But to be honest, most of the people just use this. They hand the iPhone to the kids. They can shake it and jump up and down and just have good fun with it. It's really about that sort of the pin sharp control. So that's IO shutter. And by all means, I've got some up here. And as per, just like the Orbis, B&H as well, you can get all of this, the Orbis, the Frio, and IO shutter. IO shutter you can get for all of the Canon cameras, all of the current Nikons, a lot of Samsung and Pentax SLRs, the new Fuji X-E1, and also all the Hasselblad H series. So you can get it for a ton of cameras. And that pretty much, where's my clicker? That pretty much brings me to the end of my long exposure and time-lapse talk. You can find me on just hold on one moment and I'll come straight to you. You can find us on Twitter at nlightphotopro. We're at Facebook, nlightphotopro, youtube.com/nlightphoto. Now, the cool thing that I just want to quickly tell you about on YouTube is we've got tons of hints and tips and videos where you can see all of our gear in action on YouTube. There's also a great video about off-camera chords, and there's an awesome video about setting up your Nikon camera to shoot CLS. But we just launched a magazine-style photo show on YouTube called the Nlight Photo Show. And I would love you guys to watch it and tell me what you think. Because the way I see it, everyone who's doing YouTube shows about photography are all doing them in a pretty intense style. If you want to know everything about an 85mm 1.2 lens, and you want to hear and listen to all of the ins and outs of that lens for a good 45 minutes, it's on YouTube, you can find it. I'm not into that. I just don't have the patience. I kind of want something a little bit faster flowing, a little bit more fun. Well, that's what I figured anyway, and I figured I'm probably not alone. So I just launched the Nlight Photo Show a couple of weeks ago. So if you find it on YouTube, do have a look. And please let me know what you think, because I really want to make it work. I want it to be as fun for everyone as I think it could be. And obviously when I'm filming it, Unless I hear from you guys, I don't know if we're getting it right or not, so I'd love to hear what you think. nlightphotopro.com is the home of where we're at, so you can find out all of the if you missed anything or you want to be reminded about what all the gear does, nlightphotopro.com. And that, I think, is the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.